Hello, my name is Shalisa Salters, and I will be presenting on ethics/legal issues and how observational learning relates. So, just a quick snippet of the scenario. You have Yvette, which is a RBT who is new to the case, new to this client with Jack. He's 10-year old and he has severe life-threatening allergy issues. And so you have Yvette, who is a very new RBT, new to the case, and then you have Sydney, who is the BCBA on the case. She's a veteran. She's been a BCBA at the company for 15 years now. There was some questionable behaviors that had been happening, which is why I'm presenting this case. Sydney has been showing behaviors such as hugging the siblings, having dinner with the family, talking about soccer, talking about mom's work, and the majority of the conversation was just talking about things outside of ABA and not really even pertaining to things outside of ABA in reference to or tandem to the client's behaviors. It was just outside of work things. And Yvette, which is the RBT on the case, was with the client the whole time, and the BCBA did not come to the session until towards the end. Even at the end of the session, the BCBA did not take any notes or anything. So, with this particular case, there are ethical and legal implications. So, the ethical implications, one is providing effective treatment. This is 2.01 in the ethics code in ABA. So we want to prioritize the client's rights and needs. So delaying direct observation, not checking on the client, not checking on the client's staff really was unethical and not providing effective treatment. Next is selecting, designing, and implementing behavior change interventions. The BT or the RBT was not trained on the case, and they was definitely not trained concerning the client who has these behaviors and who have life-threatening allergies. And so there was no designing, there was no implementation change, there was nothing written down for the RBT to be able to follow. There was no prioritizing positive reinforcement procedures. What are we going to do to increase or decrease behaviors? There was no summary behavior change in writing. There was no implementation of effective behavior or anything. And then lastly, it was multiple relationships. So we see that Sydney has built rapport with the client, but now it's stepping over to multiple relationships, essentially meaning unprofessional relationships, relationships that instead of professional relationships, it's looking like is building a friendship, which we want to make sure we maintain those boundaries. There are legal implications because one of the codes says conforming with legal and professional requirements. And all of these ethical codes are actually professional requirements with the organization as well as what the BACB requires. And so the BCBA standing outside of these cases is showing that there are legal issues. So some action steps as a RBT is to address the concerns to the BCBA first, just to ensure if there's miscommunication, if there's something going on, and then requesting more training, just requesting more training for the program itself, requesting more training specifically when it comes to the food, being that Yvette has not even been with a client that had severe allergies in that case. Next is documentation of the situation and emailing it to the clinical director. I would say definitely email the clinical director because it's such a severe case and you just want to make sure it's documented just so that you can be able to push that to the higher ups. If the problem continues, if the organization refuses to do anything about it, if the BCBA doesn't correct the behavior that was seen, and of course, given the BCBA time to do that, once that is allotted and there is still no change in behaviors, as a RBT, we do have a right and a legal right to be able to report this BCBA. So within this scenario, there's a lot of learning going on. And so the first type of learning that we see here is observational learning. And so essentially, observational learning occurs when an individual acquires a new behavior, skill, or attitude just simply by watching the consequence of others' people actions. So in this case, there are two different types. You have stimulus enhancement, which essentially this is with an object or person or event, it increases the observer attention to it. So we see here with Yvette the amount of time it took for Sydney to be at the table, eating dinner with the family for the majority of the session. We see that this right here is giving much attention to what's happening. And with Yvette, Yvette could possibly associate that with building rapport and seeing that, hey, this means this is how much it takes to build rapport. That means that building rapport means that you kind of negate these type of looking into the case, going out to the procedures, and she may associate building rapport as being way more important than actually effective treatment. And so you have contagious behaviors, which is essentially the learner already has that behavior in their repertoire. It's just that when they see other people do it, they will perform it. So in this case, Yvette was a new RBT. And being that she is a new RBT, she is new to the profession. So she may already have there may be some professional skills that still need to be developed. So she may have already came to the session informal, especially since this session was also in-house. It wasn't at the clinic. So she may have came to the profession already informal, already not professional as much, not having those skills versus someone who should have had it 15 years in the profession. And so this was already in the event. So whenever she sees Sydney doing it, seeing Sydney informal, seeing Sydney eating with the family, all of these things, Yvette can start to also have that behavior as well. We see operant conditioning plays a big role in this because we see what operant conditioning essentially is saying, if this building rapport build such positive results, therefore Yvette will continue to do what Sydney does. Whereas if this building rapport, staying with the parents as long as they have, having these unprofessional conversations, coming out the boundary lines, if there are negative results to it, therefore Yvette will not do those. It would decrease. And so in this case, we see that there were actually negative results because the RBT did not really feel supported. The client did not really get the help that they needed. And on the back end, even though the BCBA was talking to the parents did not get the services that they needed. And so there are some professional background perspectives that do play a lot when you do therapy, when you're approaching supervisors. I know as an ABA, I've experienced it for 6 years, and I've also been in leadership. So I do have a tendency to sometimes try to understand BCBAs before just saying, okay, they're doing something wrong, because I know how it feels to be in leadership, and there may be a lot of aspects that maybe others don't see. So my first approach will always be to just talk to the BCBA because that's based off of my own personal experience. Whereas someone who's not in leadership may have just went straight to the board, may have just went straight to the clinical director. So, and it also just depends on how you see authority. You may have grew up in a personal background where you don't challenge authority, and therefore they may have seen Sydney doing all this and may have never said anything. With someone who's been in ABA experience, healthcare experience, you really focus on professional boundaries. You really focus on ensuring treatment. You really focus on professional ethics, client safety, and accountability in human services. So those are really things that you really think about when you're in the healthcare field. So personal background information, that will be something that was really highlighted for me. Those little things with the delayed attention to this severe case was a really highlighted for me due to that background information, or my background. And so that's why we see that this might have been problematic. Also, I've had personal experience similar to this to the T, except instead of food allergies, it was seizures. And it was the same scenario. I would say that personal background does impact it. And so it can impact it in a negative way. We talked about the positive ways, but there are some ways that it can impact it negatively. So you have like confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is essentially you may have all of this information, but you only accept the information you see, you only accept the parts that confirms your what you see or what you feel or believe. And you may also have a lack of empiricism, meaning research, um, data, is it proven? Is there evidence? And you may also have a lack of philosophical doubt. So there's always a sense of like questioning yourself, not questioning because you feel like you're wrong, but because you want to make sure that this is the correct answer. You want to make sure that it's right. So you don't want to be so bent on your ways that you end up being blinded to other possibilities. And so in this particular case, we see that if someone was so bent on the BCBA because she's a BCBA, then this person may have ignored all of the evidence, the empiricism that was right in front of them. The parents did say that the behaviors was still happening, meaning that the data is showing that these behaviors are still happening. So we see here that if someone was bent on maybe being on the side of the BCBA, then we see that it would be ignoring the evidence that is physically seen there. So this is just my presentation, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Have a good day.